Congress, July 4th, 1776, a declaration by the representatives of the United States of America with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Ready! Present! Fire!
So in June of 1777, not long before the Siege of Fort Stanwix began, a Captain James Gregg, a Corporal Madison, and Gregg's dog Cricket went on an unauthorized hunting expedition. They walked a few miles away from Fort Stanwix, where they were ambushed, they were shot, they were tomahawked, and then they were scalped. Now, most people would not have survived these injuries, but Captain James Gregg did. Unfortunately, Corporal Madison did not. Now, Captain James Gregg was actually a Freemason. He was from St. Patrick's Lodge number 8. His dog Cricket, realizing what had happened, ran down to the Mohawk River, came across a bunch of soldiers from the fort who were fishing, and he barked at them. He actually grabbed them with his teeth to pull them toward James Gregg. So James Gregg was taken back to the fort. He was eventually taken to Albany for medical treatment, and he survived the war. The biggest question to me is, does Lassie have anything on little Cricket? So this is the world that we enter, a dangerous place. And if you really didn't know what you were doing, you probably wouldn't last long up here. The winters were brutal, they still are. But back in the 18th century, they didn't have all the heating and technology that we have today. They didn't have the roads. The only method of transportation was by foot or by water. So the Mohawk Valley has very unique geography. It is the only section along the entire length of the Appalachian Mountains that stretch 1,200 miles from the northeast down into the south, where there's a flat zone that will allow access out to the Great Lakes and the west. And that made this area absolutely critical strategically. So this is a map of New York State from 1777, and there are quite a few differences between now and then. First thing you'll notice is the Tryon County here was a huge county. It was named after Governor Tryon. This is mostly the Adirondack Park, so today, even today, it remains wilderness. You can also see that New York State extended out into what is now Vermont, and actually Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys were a militia that were originally formed to keep Yorkies out from their territory, Yorkies being New Yorkers. Westchester County was quite different. The top of it is Cortland Manor here. It wasn't, it was a Cortland estate. It wasn't part of Westchester County. The county actually extended all the way through the Bronx. So after Howe's victory in southern New York State, where George Washington actually crossed the Hudson and went into Jersey, Lord Germain, King George III, and General Burgoyne came up with the grand strategy of splitting the colonies in two. Their idea was, since they controlled the seas, all the waters around Manhattan, Long Island, and up the Hudson River, it would be fairly easy if they seized control of the land here and also the water transport here to cut access off from the New England states to the rest of the colonies. So they devised a plan where General Burgoyne was going to come down through Lake Champlain, Lake George, and into Albany. General Howe was going to come up from southern New York State up the Hudson River and meet in Albany. Barry St. Ledger was going to come down the St. Lawrence Seaway into Lake Ontario through the Oswego River into Oneida Lake, and then across the Oneida Carry into the Mohawk River and meet in Albany. So this is why it was so important for General Schuyler to control the Oneida Carry, because that would cut off access from St. Ledger. This is the Schuyler Mansion in Albany, New York. You see this flower bed behind me? This was Major General Philip Schuyler's military headquarters. It was torn down but the foundation remains underneath the flowers. So this is the view from the Schuyler Mansion grounds, and you could see before all these buildings were built that he must have had some commanding view of the Hudson River. The Albany Masonic Temple in Albany, New York. There's been a temple on this site since 1768. Union Lodge number 1 used to meet here. It is now Mount Vernon Lodge number 3. Union Lodge number 1, Peter Ganesvort, his brother, his nephew, Sir William Johnson, John Butler, they were all members of Union Lodge number 1. Now, between Union Lodge number 1, St. George's Lodge in nearby Schenectady, and St. Patrick's Lodge in Johnstown, there were hundreds of men who were made Masons in these lodges who served in the American Revolution. In April of 1777, Major General Philip Schuyler ordered the 3rd New York Regiment under then Colonel Peter Ganesvort to occupy and hold Fort Stanwix.
And while the 3rd New York Regiment, the main garrison of the fort during the siege, had been sent up here in 2 detachments in the spring of 1777 in April, and then later in May, part of the regiment was being raised around the Albany area under Colonel Ganesvort, and then the rest of the regiment had actually been posted down at Constitution Island out across from West Point. And was down there with Lieutenant Colonel Willett. Everybody just assumed that Sir John Johnson was going to, everybody I should say on the Patriot or Rebel side assumed that it would be Sir John Johnson that would be leading the Loyalist and Indian forces down into the Mohawk Valley to gain back their property and holdings and lands in the Mohawk Valley, which they were right to a degree, but of course when the operation then became a larger operation supporting General Burgoyne's advance down along Lake Champlain, Lake George, they then of course put a British commander, Barry St. Ledger or Sillinger, in charge of it with 2 small detachments of British regulars, a company of Hessian riflemen, and a small British artillery detachment as well, in addition to Sir John Johnson's King's Royal Regiment in New York and somewhere between 700 to 1,000 mostly Six Nations Indians, mostly from Mohawk and Seneca, with some smaller representations of Cayuga, Onondaga, and even a small handful of Oneida.
So Ganesvort arrived here in May, and they immediately set about restoring the fort, setting it up. They received warning from Oneida scouts that the British were planning something, so they had to get ready.
The problem is that the Connecticut regiment that was currently here, basically their enlistments were ending, and so they were trying to get troops up here before everybody in the Connecticut regiment said, well, I'm going home now, and the fort was sitting here empty.
Later that month, forces from the 9th Massachusetts arrived to support Ganesvort's forces.
Ebenezer, I believe, Learned's brigade.
Okay.
And they had basically taken a certain number of men out of each of his regiments and formed this composite unit to then send up.
So this is a very historic spot in central New York. This is the beginning of the carry, and it's the end of the Mohawk River Passage. So you bring your boats up here, you'd have to carry all your goods to Wood Creek on the other side. It was also the spot where the Massachusetts troops came in, and Brant actually captured the captain of the boats of that crew. Now, on the other side, Captain Willett came out with 250 troops, and he raided Brant's camp here, and they looted it. Then the British came back, they fortified the position with cannons, and they remained here until the end of the siege. Also in this spot is where the original portion of the Erie Canal went. It's no longer here. Now this is just dirt around here. There's nothing left except for the sign here. And it's on a very nondescript road in Rome, and I would have never found it without the help of Josh from the Oriskany battlefield. So thank you so much, Josh. We really appreciate that one. So Barry St. Ledger left Montreal on June the 26th. He arrived at the mouth of the Oswego River on Lake Ontario on July the 25th, and there he assembled his troop. So we're looking at the Oswego River, where it opens up into Lake Ontario in the port city of Oswego. The first known Masonic visitor to this area was Sir William Johnson. He came here in 1766 to meet with Pontiac after the rebellion. Now, 1766 was the exact same year that St. Patrick's Lodge was chartered and started, so it must have been a very busy year for Sir William. Now there were British troops that were stationed here until 1796, and then in agreement with the United States they left. That was actually the same year that Huguenot Lodge number 46 was chartered and first met. Now the troops that were stationed here, the British troops, they actually had a Masonic lodge that would meet. It was a traveling military lodge, which was quite common in those days. Currently, Lake City Lodge number 127 meets in Oswego. They recently celebrated their 175th year, so they are also a very, very old lodge. Peter Ganesvort had actually ordered his troops to go to Wood Creek and cut down trees and fell them into the river, and that was intentionally done to stall the advance of St. Ledger. It worked. His troops got tied up and they did have to clean out the river. They arrived here on August 2nd. Now, the artillery they came with just was inadequate to really do any kind of serious damage to this fort. So Ganesvort really got lucky with that. The visitor center at Fort Stanwix, the fort's right behind us. It's only about 25 minutes from Utica, so if you ever come up for St. John's weekend for any other reason, it's well worth taking a short trip and planning an outing here.